Hello, Congregation Beth Or. It is good to be with you virtually in this way. We have Rabbi Marx and Mr. N and myself here, and it is almost time for Yom Ha'atzma'ut, Israel's Independence Day. So we wanted to record a little conversation between the three of us about what it is to celebrate Yom Ha'atzma'ut, and also to just talk a little bit about Israel and where Israel is in our hearts and in our minds. So to kick off today, I was curious, Rabbi Marx, we'll start with you. What's your earliest memory of learning about Israel? When did you first know that Israel was a place on the map?
So I would say that I learned about Israel as a country and as an idea when I was a young boy growing up in Miami Beach, Florida, listening to my rabbi, Alav Shalom, Leon Kronish, who was an ardent Zionist and a lover of Israel. And whenever I was at services, whenever I was in religious school, he would speak about Israel. He would speak about what it represents, its struggles. I remember growing up and learning about the 6-Day War when I was in Hebrew school. So that had a lasting impression on me. And I will also say that at that time in the mid 1960s, early 1960s, that was still in the shadow of the Holocaust. And so I learned about Israel, and that shapes my appreciation for her because I see how that country rose up out of the ashes and helped redefine what it means to be a Jew today. It taught me that, the word Jew does not always mean victim. For me, it was, Jew can be warrior and farmer and scientist. And it was a place that I learned to love. And I will always be grateful to my rabbi for instilling that love in me.
And one follow-up question for you. How long did it take from when you started learning about it until you arrived, till you touched down at Ben Gurion Airport? When was your first trip to Israel?
Well, my first trip to Israel, I was in 10th grade. I was in confirmation, and my rabbi had the idea to send the confirmation class to Israel. So I was there for, I think, 7 or 8 weeks in the summer of 1972, right after the Yom Kippur, right after the 6-Day War, right before the Yom Kippur War, and that had such a last. I will tell you, I was kind of like a typical indifferent Jewish kid growing up in Miami Beach, Florida. And I came back from Israel, and it's almost like a pilot light had always been burning, but it just was ignited and just filled my heart and my soul. And I came back an ardent Zionist. And the first thing I did when I came to Beth Or was begin a confirmation class pilgrimage to Israel, because I know what it did for me. So my first time to Israel, 1972.
Wow, very cool. Thank you for sharing. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. N. And also just to highlight that we talk about Israel so much at Beth Or, but it's hard. It's a challenge, right? That we can't take everyone there and say, wow, look at how amazing this is. So I want to hear a little bit about your Israel story, and then also, Mr. N, how do we ignite that spark that Rabbi Marx was just talking about in our young people?
Absolutely. I'll tell you this, the first time that I went to Israel was in 2013. So relatively recently, right? It just was
when you were 15 years old.
Yeah, right. More like when I was 40 years old, right? It just hadn't been something that I'd been able to do. So it sort of speaks to your point, Rabbi Bonder, that not everybody can get to Israel in those teen years or whatnot. Even still, it was essential to who I was. It was something that transformed me, like Rabbi Marx said. That feeling of being in a place that I had heard about it, studied about, and learned about, and loved, faced every time that I prayed. And for me, standing in front of the Kotel for the first time, or even coming up upon the Kotel, was like seeing my best friend for the first time ever. It was just like that odd moment of, I've never been here, yet I've always been here.
I don't want to interrupt, but just to make sure our audience knows, what is the Kotel, Mr. M?
Sure, the Western Wall, that aspect of the retaining wall that still stands underneath the surface of the Temple Mount, right? So that's where Jews often face, and that's where we often go to. It's sort of our pilgrimage moment. But it was so life-changing for me. And the next year, I was there actually with my father that year. And then the next year I went to Israel and I took my son with me. And so in back-to-back years, I had different perspectives on that. And it was transformative for my son. He came back, not to tell his story, but he came back and started wearing a yarmulke all the time. And he started really embracing Judaism in a big way. And so, I think that I can answer your question in two ways there. For me, it was transformative to go there, but it also allowed me to see what it does to young people to go there. My son was 13, 14 when he went. It was right after his bar mitzvah. And so it changed his life. And so Rabbi Marx's movement to get all the students to go in confirmation is something that I've really supported, and we still do that. Clearly, our class trip in 2020 was canceled because of COVID, but we still do take students. And in the summer of 2019, we had the religious school family trip to Beth Or. So we had a bunch of families who went, and it was just an incredible thing. So we try to teach Judaism as a modern country as well as a historical place. If we're not careful, the thing that I really try to fight against is if we're not careful, our students will only see Israel as the place of the patriarchs, of camels and tents and that sort of thing. And instead, and especially in our 5th grade curriculum, we teach them about the major cities of Israel. We teach them about the major entrepreneur aspect of Israel. We try to give them the sense of Israel as a modern and live place.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I think it puts you in such a unique and wonderful position that you have been to Israel, but you know what it is to cultivate a love and a connection to Israel without having ever been there. And that is really, really special. I'll jump in and share that I grew up knowing about Israel as a place on the map because, sorry, I'm
you're getting choked up
here a little bit. I get all choked up when I talk about Israel. So I grew up learning about Israel and Hebrew. I had a really special experience as a Jewish day school kid, but it wasn't until, as many people know, baseball that actually brought me to Israel. I've never gone on a trip. I've never gone on vacation to Israel. I spent 3 months there in 2007 to play ball. And for me, having that interest in religion studies and Judaism really sent me beyond the ball field, and I got to explore the country. My parents came to watch me play, and we spent lots of time going on tours around the country. It was great, and my grandparents too. But then beyond that, then I went back for rabbinical school for 10 months, a full school year. And that was a tremendous experience. And like each of you have said, it made things that I learned in a book really come alive. So Israel is turning 73 years old, coming up very, very shortly. And it blows my mind that there are people walking all around this planet that are older than the state of Israel, that actually some people can remember the state of Israel coming into being. That's not something we can say in the US, being hundreds of years old. So I'm curious to know how you plan on celebrating this special occasion, and maybe we'll wrap up with that to give people a little taste of what it's like to celebrate Yom Ha'atzma'ut, Israeli Independence Day. So Rabbi Marx, you want to take it away? What do you plan to do this year?
Well, I'm doing two things. Number one, I'm going to try to feed the heart and the head and also the stomach. So one of the things I'm delighted about is we're bringing a congregant of ours. Her name is Joanna Zieger-Guerra. She grew up in this synagogue. I celebrated at her bat mitzvah. I confirmed her, and she made aliyah to Israel. And she now works for an organization called Dror Yisrael, which is a modern urban kibbutz. And so rather than have kibbutz outside in the countryside, planting crops and whatnot and harvesting them, she works within the inner city and tries to harvest the goodness of people and to try to bring the needs and the services to them in an urban setting. So like, for example, in Tel Aviv, there are many immigrants that come from Africa, and she attends to their needs. And we're going to have a program where she speaks about Israel on the cutting edge of helping people who are migrating to Israel. Because it's interesting, many people who are coming up out of Africa don't want to land in Egypt. They don't want to end up in Syria or Saudi Arabia. They want to come to Israel. And that's causing some social problems for Israel and economic problems. Dror Yisrael is trying to address that. And the second thing is, on April 18th, from 10 to, I think, 1 o'clock, we're bringing in a kosher food truck, sort of addressing, bringing food to the congregation, but doing it in a way that's safe for COVID. And they're going to be serving falafel in chips bepita. So I'm really excited about this. And so we're going to have Israeli food in the parking lot of the congregation, and I'm going to bring my Israeli music and set it up with a loudspeaker, and we're going to have a great time. So we'll talk about Israel, we'll study Israel, and then we'll eat some Israeli food.
Fantastic. Both of you I know have seen it already, but for the parents watching this, I have created a little video of how to make your own Israeli flag. So depending on the age, you might need to, cut out some pieces for your, 3 or 4-year-old, but 7, 8 years old, if they're good with scissors, always have an adult in the room, but they can cut out and make their own Israeli flag to use. It's a cute little art project. But any way that you can bring Israel into your home and let them know that there is a place in the world where all of this beauty and religious ideology and also just the religious joy of being Jewish, it's where it flows from, and it's an incredible
thing. Can I jump in one? My daughter does something Please. Which is really nice. So Please. On Spotify, she listens to Omer Adam, and she listens to Israeli music. And to be honest with you, it just makes me feel like I'm in Israel. So you can get all of this music on Spotify, just kind of in the search, right? Israeli popular music, and you can bring a little bit of Israel culture to your home.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people would be so surprised to find out it's not all what you'd hear in the synagogue. I know we know that, but it's pop music that's blasting both in the clubs in Tel Aviv, and of course you have some music that is popular but also deeply, deeply religious in so many ways. So lots of great music there. Mr. N, anything going on with the school this year for Yom Ha'atzma'ut? What are we doing? I know I'll be bringing it into my classroom.
For sure, and I know I can count on you to share that music with your students. We'll be doing a couple of things at Yobo, our Youth of Beth Or program. And then as well, Jillian Peskin and I will be going out to the local Jewish student unions at least at Upper Dublin High School to do some outreach for Yom Ha'atzma'ut as well. And Rabbi Bonder, I might take your making an Israeli flag activity to it, because while it's some construction paper, it's also a fun thing to do with your hands. So we'll try to get some bamba and some other Israeli food to take as we go to Upper Dublin High School and meet with the Jewish students there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for this engaging conversation. We hope that all of you out there watching find it engaging as well. Let us know what you think. We're thinking about and get a little conversation here. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Leitrot.